Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will gonna start just in a few minutes. We're just waiting for people to join us. Okay, I think probably gonna start and then people can join throughout the period, okay? Once again, thank you so much, Shalom, and welcome to all of you for all of our audience from all over the world. My name is Yehuda Michael. I'm a program director at MCTC. My colleague Nuria Levy and I are excited to have you with us for online lecture series on civil society activism. Community and individual social activism is of a great contributor to the promotion of just and inclusive society. At the age of the digital media, social movements are formed rapidly and grow into a global influence even faster than ever. Citizens mobilized encourage individuals to volunteer and to take action for the betterment of their own society. This lecture series aims to present and expose the participants to different models of civil society and activism in various aspects and topics. This is the first meeting. The series holds three meetings. For the first meeting today, we will focus on creating a roadmap for social justice. That will be our lecture topic today. Before we start, some logistics. We are recording this meeting and later on posted on our YouTube channel for those who didn't make it today. So if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera. Now I will tell you a little bit about our organization, MCTC Meshav. MCTC was founded in 1961 by two visionary women, our former Prime Minister Golda Meir and Mina Ben-Zvi, MCTC founding director, through Meshav, Israel Agency for International Development Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As you can see, Hava showed you who Golda Meir is, so that is great. MCTC focused on three main areas. First one is entrepreneurship and innovation. The second one is early childhood education. And the third one is sustainable community development. We believe in women's contribution to a society and country's economy. We stress gender equality is the key for sustainable development. So all of our programs are actually based on gender equality and women empowerment. Okay, so this is about us. Now I will give our director, Hava Carey, to say a few words for our participants. Hava, please.
Just like to say welcome, everybody. I see people from all over the world, and that's very exciting. And I'd like to thank Dr. Jennifer Cohen for coming on with us today. We really appreciate your taking the time to be with us this morning, afternoon, evening, depending where you are. Of course, thank you to Yehuda and Nuria for putting this series together. Thank you very much. The topic is very, very important today, as always, but today more than ever, maybe. And we really we're very happy that you came on, and we welcome you when you're after COVID to come and join us in beautiful Haifa. And we are very happy to be hosting Jennifer and the other lecturers that will be coming on in the next weeks. So we're touching on different topics. Yehuda mentioned today's and Jennifer, so please take it away. And thank you so much. Toda rabah.
Thank you so much, Hava. Thank you for the opening remarks. So without further ado, let's move into today's speaker. I am pleased to introduce you to our speaker for today, Dr. Jennifer Cohen, an adjacent faculty at the Hebrew University. Dr. Jennifer Cohen is currently working as an adjacent faculty in Hebrew University in Jerusalem. In addition, Dr. Cohen also served as evaluator and organizational consultant in Israel, Europe, and the United States. Dr. Cohen is also a director of organizational learning and evaluation at the Association for the Advancement of Civil Equality. Previous to Hebrew University, Dr. Cohen has worked at the University of Haifa as well as the University of Massachusetts as an adjacent faculty. Dr. Cohen holds a PhD from University of Massachusetts. Thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for joining us today. Please take it from here.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And Yuda, you can put up the PowerPoint. That would be great.
Sure.
So a couple of things before we even get started. I'm actually not a big PowerPoint person. I do have some slides because I know that in the world today, if you don't have slides, you're not considered a lecturer. So feel free to look at them to the extent that you want to. I will tell you that not every word I'm about to say, and in fact, most of what I'm about to say is not found on these slides. So I really want to suggest that you have in front of you a pen and paper to take some notes so that if there are questions you want to ask, I'm going to periodically stop and see if there are specific questions. You're welcome to also load them as we go onto the chat. And I also really hope you'll take this opportunity to practice along with me. I've tried to make this a kind of participatory activity and not just me talking at you. I feel like you could probably read books and you didn't need to get online today and find this hour and a half out of your busy lives just to hear me talking. So I really want to suggest that there'll be certain points when I suggest to you that you actually write stuff down and then share it with us. I think that's it for the opening. I understand that today is the first of your meetings in a series of lectures. And actually, in some ways, that's very appropriate because the topic that we're exploring, sometimes referred to as monitoring and evaluation, sometimes measurement and evaluation. And I suggest that you add the L in front and think about learning, measurement, monitoring, and evaluation, and I'll explain why, is something that if you remember nothing else from this hour and a half that we have together, that you take away with you, that this is a way of seeing the world and a way of doing your work that requires you to think strategically from the first moment that you open your eyes in the morning, and not only evaluation as sometimes is referred to as compliance at the end of a project, to see, did we do everything we said we were going to do? The kind of evaluation, monitoring, measurement, and learning that I'm talking with you about today as people interested in social activism and social change requires that we think about what we are trying to do, what the tools are that we believe are going to advance those changes, and how do we know that we are in fact moving in the right direction. And to the extent that you start thinking about that before you even put your feet on the floor and make a cup of tea or coffee or whatever you might drink in the morning, your work will be better for it. So if you look at the first slide actually on there, you'll see that that initial picture shows us that this is a spiral process, that before we start collecting data, which we're going to talk about in a second, you clarify very clearly what is it that you are trying to change in the world, whether it's on the level of individuals, on the level of a neighborhood, a community, policy, clarifying very clearly what is the change we want to see, not just what are the activities that we do that will come along with it. And you can see along the way that this spirals back and forth. When we do this kind of work correctly, we identify the change we want to see, we start strategizing, we collect data, we ask questions, we answer the questions. I believe in doing that in a participatory way with as many of your stakeholders as possible. And then you use the answers to the data that you collected to come back around and adjust and tweak the model. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about how, as people who care about making change in the world, you can help yourselves and your partners, whether those are planning partners or participants in your programs, to really hammer out what is the strategy that we believe is going to make a difference. That's what we're talking about today. Like I said, M&E is the traditional language that many of you who may be applying for funding or survive based on funding, you know the terms M&E. So I'm not going to go totally back to square one, but I am going to suggest to you that over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, depending on where you are in the world, funders have been increasingly demanding that we know how to identify the changes that are happening. and that there's more accountability than ever before. And taking pictures of kids enjoying themselves on a summer day playing in a park is no longer acceptable sort of proof that we're doing good work. And to that end, there's a demand. And we're also seeing that increasingly from the ground up, people like us, I dare to count myself among you who care about doing social change work. We also need to know in these trying, challenging days that what we're doing is making a difference. So there's the supply side and the demand side that's coming together over the last couple of decades, depending again on where you are in the world. Here in Israel, we've seen dramatic changes over literally the last 5 to 8 years. We've seen organizations and funders and activists on the ground asking to learn about how to do this well. So I suggest that you talk about L, M, and E. That's what you're going to see it all the way through. And you're starting to see that also in the literature. But if you put in Google learning measurement or learning monitoring and evaluation, you're going to get less than M and E. So keep that in mind. There's 2 reasons why I suggest you put that L there. One is because measurement and evaluation, no matter how self-aware and open we pride ourselves on being to change and to feedback and to evaluation, psychologically speaking, it is hard for all of us. This is what I do for a living. And I'm telling you, when my kids were in school, I did not reply to the surveys that they sent me asking how I thought the school was doing, because even though I make these surveys and I know that they are anonymous because I program them in, I did not believe that somehow someone wasn't going to hear that I was critical, and I did not believe that that would not harm my children. So we can't help it. We're human beings, and feedback is hard. So one of the reasons why I suggest you use the L is because it sort of lowers that, that boom of, oh no, we're going to get feedback. It sort of softens it because nobody really can object to learning. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is because the learning reminds us that really we are doing this data collection and analysis and putting in the time and energy to analyze what's going on with our work for us in order to improve our work, in order to make our management better, and also hopefully our impact better and greater. And only secondarily may we use these findings, which of course we need to communicate externally, including with funders. But very often, and really until very recently, the primary reason to do a roadmap and to do a plan of what you were going to do was because the funder required you to do so. And I want to suggest that you do it first of all for yourselves, because it's going to help you do your work better. And that could be on any level. It could be work that you're doing in the field, and it could be about a course like this, right? You could say, what is the goal of this course? And in advance, talk about what do we want to learn, and not just say, okay, X number of people showed up, but really understand what happened there. But let me just say a word about me. And really, I could only hope that one day we can meet in person and I would have the chance to hear from you, and you wouldn't all be on mute for the most part. But it would be weird if I didn't say anything about myself. So I'm Jen Cohen, Jennifer. I am a community organizer by training. And for 37 years, almost since coming to Israel, I've been involved in social change, community-based social change organizations in this country. And so one of the things that gets me to this world of learning, measurement, monitoring, evaluation is that I myself have been on the field, down in the field, in the weeds doing this work. And I want to know, is it making a difference, really as a community organizer? The second is that, as you can hear, although I've lived in Israel for almost 37 years, I'm originally from the United States. And so whatever organizations I've worked at as a frontline social worker, I've always been asked to explain to outsiders what it is that we're doing and why what we're doing matters. And so even before LMNE was a profession, and certainly before I knew that it was one, I sort of developed a toolbox for a way to talk about these things. So that's sort of the second leg that I lean on. And the third is that my PhD research looked at high impact social change organizations. So I didn't come in and evaluate an organization and say, you are high impact. I chose organizations who, according to someone else's criteria, are considered high impact. and I looked at the strategies that they use. And one of the slightly interesting things that came out of that research was that the most high impact organizations use tools of learning, measurement, monitoring, and evaluation as an everyday management practice. And that is why we're suggesting on the first day of this series of lectures that you adopt some of these. We're going to talk a little later on about what are some of the kind of criteria of what's considered good evaluation. And one of them is just that you use it, is that you use the findings. We're not talking about, doing a doctorate on every single piece of your work, but we are talking about asking good questions, collecting those answers from as many different data sources as you can, and then using the information that you get to improve the project. So that was my research. So with those three pillars for the last decade or so, I've been doing teaching and consulting inside organizations and from the outside of organizations. I'm going to leave the picture of the elephant to the end and see if we get to it. And you can remind me at the end if we have time. We'll go back to that slide. For now, let's move ahead. I want to remind you, I'm going to do kind of a bit of introduction of some common terminology when we're talking about this stuff, and then we're going to practice it. So I'd say for another 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to talk, and then we're going to actually practice. I should say up front a little caveat. We're talking about a topic that really is, sometimes people do master's degrees in this stuff, and we have another hour and 21 minutes. So we're really going to zoom through this. And as I go, I'm going to try to model for you some tools that you can also use back at home with your teams. Whether it's, I'm not sure, I assume that some of the work that you're doing is as professionals, and some of you are doing it as volunteer, engaged in your community. And whoever that is, I'm going to suggest as we go that you could use some of these activities out in the field. Okay, so having said that, I am going to talk about a couple of overall concepts. The reason why there's a picture here of salad on the screen is because here in Israel we have an expression that when there's a big mishmash of stuff that everyone sort of threw in together like salad, you just throw in whatever you have and it becomes a salad, as long as there's some fresh vegetables in it. There is a salad of terminology out there in the world. Many of you may know this, you may meet this day in, day out. We ask ourselves, what are our results? What happened? Did we succeed? And we're not entirely in agreement on what that actually means. And that is one of the things that makes it very difficult actually to measure what it is we're doing, especially when we're talking about social change that is complex. So as a result, you should just know there is a salad of terminology out there. You're not crazy. This is challenging for all of us. And one of the things that the professionals and the academics and the practitioners are trying to do is come up with some agreed terminology. So that's what I'm going to present to you today. I'm going to suggest a particular glossary of terms. I don't claim that mine is the right one. I'm just saying that you should decide on the terminology with your partners and then be consistent with how you use it. Okay, so having said that, let me name a couple of these call out things that I wanted to talk about. Before I go further, any questions in Nuria in the chat, or that somebody wants to?
Very quickly, we have a question from one of our participants. She's from Guatemala, Marielos, and she would like to know, because you spoke a little bit about planning, how often is recommended to review your plans? And also how often evaluate to get feedback and accountability? How often
Evaluators should give it or get it?
I think she meant both, but...
Okay, great. Okay, great. So as far as I'm concerned, you should do learning and evaluation every minute of the wake, of your waking day, and even while you're dreaming and sleeping about your work that you care so much about. To be realistic, I have 2 tips to answer that question, and you can tell me if I sufficiently answered it or if you want me to go further. One is, and this is sort of new, like I said, over the past years, one is to make sure that your work plan actually speaks to benchmark outcomes. Very often I see work plans that actually don't say anything about the benchmark outcomes. They like have on a piece of paper above, it'll say the overarching goal of what they're trying to do. But then it says Monday, wake up and recruit students. Tuesday, hire staff. Wednesday, blah, blah, blah. And there's nothing in there. And something over the last decade or so that has really helped us improve our work is making sure that on the work plan, whether it's, like a linear one or from top to bottom, however, whether it's Excel or Word, whatever your work plan looks like, make sure that it's very clear what activity is supposed to lead to what outcome, even if it's a short-term outcome. So that's tip number one. And then one of the things that I really like working with teams is occasionally, first of all, hang that up on top of your computer or on the wall next to you, and don't put it in a drawer, whatever you do. It shouldn't be something that you just put away. You do, and you say, oh, we're done, and you put it away. I assume based on the question that whoever answered it realizes that. And I suggest that at a bare minimum, twice a year, teams take that out and systematically sit together. Ideally, once a quarter, once a month, it depends on your resources, but really at a bare minimum, once in the middle of the year, right? At the beginning of the year, you planned it. The middle of the year, you look at it. The end of the year, you sort of wrap it up in anticipation of tweaking it for next year. A very nice, easy way to do that is to make copies of either make copies or put it up on a bulletin board, and have people paint in green the places on the work plan where things have gone exactly as you hoped they would go. You can also put in green progress or success, if you will, that you didn't necessarily expect to have happen, but it happened. Like maybe you didn't plan to have meetings every week, you planned to have them every month, but there was so much enthusiasm that you started having them every week. So you would add that onto your work plan that you did in January in green. So the green is good. I start with the green. It's always positive. The easiest thing to go to is red. And if you don't want to use red and you want to use dark orange, that's okay too. But these are places where, like a stop sign, we need to stop in place and ask some questions. What is going on here? Something's wrong. Either we did not succeed in doing the activity, or the activity did not succeed in making the change that we wanted to see happen. And then paint in yellow places where we want to talk about it with each other. And we're not sure what's happening there. Yellow could be something that on the one hand, for example, in policy work, on the one hand, we've managed to move the needle and get some decision makers on our side. And on the other hand, we made them angry because we did some outreach and we did something in the media. So that could be like yellow. On the one hand, there's something good. On the one hand, there's something red. So those are two. I hope that answered the question. And if it didn't, write again in the chat and you'll be able to let me know.
We will do. Thanks.
Okay, great. Was there anything else, Nolia, or should I keep going?
No, keep going.
Okay, so let me say something about some of these terms that are on here. And again, we're just setting the ground here. Albert Einstein, and apparently was the original person associated with this quote, but then there are others who also claim to have said it, that not everything that can be counted counts. Not everything that we can easily collect and show on a scale is what really matters to us. And not everything that counts, that really matters to us, can be counted. That's sort of like an underlying assumption that you should be going with here. You should be creative, and you shouldn't let yourself stop from dreaming. At the stage of asking yourselves what really matters to us and what do we want to try to understand, it happens to me literally every day where a staff member says, but how are we going to measure it? And I'm like, don't think about that right now. First, make sure that you're really clear about what you care about. You're not going to be able to check everything, but first just say what it is that you really, really care about. And then we can talk about the methodology. But don't stop yourselves or anyone else from really identifying what matters here. Okay, that's one little underlying thing. The pictures that there's somebody there cooking and there's somebody eating. So there's over 100 different types of evaluation that are relevant for social projects like the ones that I understand you're all involved with. We don't have time to talk about 100 of them. I'm gonna identify for you, I think, the two that are most, or the four that are most relevant to you, two pairs that are probably most relevant to you. One is internal evaluation and one is external evaluation. So the way it sounds, internal is when there's someone on the team who by definition, your partner, is helping collect the data and analyze it totally inside. And like on the way other end of the scale would be someone who's completely external, who supposedly knows nothing about you. These two extremes of kinds of evaluation assume that sometimes assume that internal is more subjective and external is more objective. I, for one, and Michael Quinn Patton, who I quoted next to the elephant on the earlier slide, who is kind of the father of modern evaluation, at least in the United States, but also elsewhere, believe that this issue of objectivity and subjectivity is less helpful for us in the social change world than it might be in academic research, although I would claim this in academic research too. What does matter is how close or far away we are from what it is we're trying to understand and learn. And to that end, my recommendation is that you have as many different data sources as you can looking at, let's say, the elephant, and that some of the data sources and some of the people who know something about what you're doing, who have an opinion about what you're doing, some of them be internal and some of them be external. Some of them be closer, like you yourselves, and some of them be farther away at different points in time. So that's one type of evaluation that I assume is relevant to you. The other pair is formative, summative. And if I'm repeating something, you know, forgive me. Formative is talking about evaluation that happens all the time, all the way along the way. Like the first slide show, that spiral, that all the time we're constantly making course corrections. If we had an activity, we had a meeting in the community on a Tuesday night and a Thursday night, and we collected data about who showed up on Tuesday night and who showed up on Thursday night, and we found out that both quantitatively and qualitatively, fewer people who are our target audience came on Thursdays. We should not wait till the end of the year. We should have two groups on Tuesdays, and we should let Thursdays go. That's considered formative evaluation. Summative, like it sounds, it's at the end. And it's appropriate to use a combination of summative and formative. And I assume that for you all, these are the two kinds of evaluation that are most relevant. But you should know that there are gazillions of types. I want to talk, so the whole thing about these two pictures. So the cook and the little boy eating. So the cook is the formative chef, and the little boy eating the soup after it's already done, right? So the chef tastes as she goes, and the little boy is tasting at the end, and he's going to give his opinion at the end. That's the difference between formative and summative. Let me say something about proving versus improving, and it's nice because it rhymes in English. So many of you want to be able to prove that your intervention is making a difference, and many of your supporters and partners want to be able to say that. It is very hard to do that. And I'm going to spend some of the time that we have left talking about why that is so difficult. I'm not saying you should compromise on trying to understand and trying to prove what exactly you're doing and how much it matters and how it does matter. What I'm suggesting is that for sure, as you go along, you can improve. And I feel like that's sort of like a good working assumption or like a best practice to keep in mind. We want to be able to prove, but we also want to improve all the way along. So I guess you're getting a sense of sort of what my approach is here, and I hope that some of this will be useful to you. Okay, two more comments here. I don't love the word success. I know that you're always asked to describe your success and you want to be able to say we succeeded here. First of all, I think there's a lot to learn from failure and not just from success. That's a whole lecture in and of itself. But most often when we're talking about the kind of social change and activism that I understand you all are engaged with, what we can measure and identify and explain and understand more easily than success, which we might have different definitions of, is progress. So if you say, my goal is to increase the capacity of local activists to get their message out, then you can say, you can measure at the beginning what their beginning capacity is. And then as long as they move the needle a little bit, that is considered progress, even if they're not all yet, number 10 best ever community organizers. So that's another suggestion I have for you, is think about what progress will look like, and leave the success to, I don't know, the funders. And again, you're going to have to tell your stories, but to the extent that you can tell them where you've seen movement, that is very compelling, and you can always see that. Okay, the last sort of underlying assumption or principle is choose places to learn that are modest, but do them systematically. So even in your whole project, let's say for 2021, this crazy year that we're in, even if you only choose one thing to look at, do it well, do it from beginning to end. And we'll talk about what that means, doing it, but it means ask yourself one question, not 2,000 questions that you could definitely ask about your work. Ask yourselves one question, but systematically come up with as many answers as you can about that one thing. And make sure that the evaluation you're doing and the learning that you're doing is really worth it, really counts. Okay, those are some principles. Questions about those principles before we dig in to practice?
We have nothing at the moment.
Microphone and yell. Okay, if not, then you can go to the next slide. And here's where I'm really recommending that you take out a piece of paper and get ready, because we're going to start practicing. So just to show, I'll just say one other thing about these special challenges. So in general, evaluation of anything is hard. I'm sure you all know that. What we're talking about today is how to follow that path of making some kind of social change with your activists that you're working with. And in that kind of work, there are some special challenges. So I'm going to name them and then give you some tips for how to address those particular challenges. So I'm just going to name them, and then we're going to dig into some practice. So the first big challenge that I already told you is that there's a salad of terminology. And so we don't all have agreement on what we mean, including like, what's the goal? We haven't always sat down with our partners to say, this is really what we hope is going to happen. What we really want to see happen, is it really improving scores on tests for kids? Or is really what's important that those kids build a community together, right? So there could be like an after-school program where the real goal is the improvement of their grades. And the way that you're going to get to that is building a kind of community. Great project. But it could be the opposite. It could be that really what you're trying to do is create a community of kids here who are then going to become the leaders in their community. And the way that you're getting them together is by convincing them that you will give them help in their homework. And those are two, and that's also a great project, very different projects. So my tip on how to deal with the salad of terminology is for you all to define very clearly how do you define the goal and what is the goal? What are the core activities that you believe are going to advance those goals? So the core activity is the intervention that you believe is going to make the change. The output is the deliverable, is the measurable deliverable of the activity. So almost always the output is almost always the number of the events and or the number of participants. That's it. And until 5, 10, 20 years ago, depending on where you were in the world, that's all we measured. Nowadays, that's not enough. Nowadays, we're saying it's not enough to know how many classes we did. We want to know what happened as a result of those classes. Did those kids become a strong community to support one another or not? Did their grades actually improve or not? And that's new thinking. Those are the outcomes. So agree on your terminology. And if you're going to say results, what do you mean by results? Do you mean outputs and how many activities we did? Or do you mean how many kids improved their scores and by how much? So that's the first tip. Another challenge, big challenge in this particular arena that we all are working in is that there aren't always theories of change in the ways that there are theories in a lot of other areas that we research, right? We don't, there, especially in places around the world where the day-to-day life is so dynamic. So I can use the example of Israel right now. We haven't had a, solid lawmaking body for consistently for several years now. We've been living from election to election. And so if my theory of change says that in order to advance sustainable health policies, I need to work with our parliamentary members, but they keep coming and going, well, that theory is not going to work anymore. So again, the challenge that I'm naming for you is that we don't always have in our worlds, and if we were together in the same room, I'd ask you for some examples. We don't always have those theories, and the theories that we have, because we are doing this complex work in such complicated and dynamic settings, the theories don't always help us. And that is often the excuse that we use for not doing good evaluation, by the way. People like me are saying not acceptable. And the answer to that challenge is make a theory of change anyway. Make whatever you want to call it, whether you want to call it a theory of change or a logic model or a work plan that's grounded in outcomes. You may know these different terms. Whatever you call it, make a roadmap, make a plan that says, here is how we believe that we are going to reduce hunger in this particular community. Now, it's got to be dynamic, right? We said that this is very complicated and dynamic. Don't put it in a drawer. Keep it on the wall or keep it on your computer. And as you go, keep on updating it. But the answer to that challenge that we don't have good theories to rely on is do the best you can. Fake it till you make it. Okay, so that's the second challenge that I'm going to talk about today. The third special challenge that's relevant to a lot of our work, I assume, is that many of the ultimate changes that we want to see happen, whether it's on the individual level, the community level, the policy level, and other levels, is way far down in the future, down the road. Not just the roadmap of your plan, but kind of the roadmap of the world. And so that is also an excuse that we use to ourselves and to others to say, we don't know if we're going to succeed. We don't know if we're going to ultimately achieve our goal, because it by definition, we're not going to know that for 20 years. If we're doing intervention with elementary school kids about helping them be more ready to get into the job market, well, literally, we can't know that within a year or 2 years or 10 years, maybe. And that's a legitimate challenge. It's a legitimate problem. The answer to how to deal with that challenge is to identify benchmark outcomes. And we can always identify in the short term, do those kids feel more competent than they did 2 months ago or 3 months ago? Do those young parents feel less terrified of parenting their children? I don't know what some of your other examples are, but these are like short-term. Usually it's attitude change. Sometimes it's capacity change. So if one of the things we're doing is training volunteers, we're going to use in a minute an example of training volunteers. You can absolutely know in the first 6 months, even in the first month sometimes, that people have widened their toolbox. They came in with an empty toolbox and now they have a full toolbox. So the answer to the challenge of long-term outcomes is to identify for yourselves with your team what are some short and midterm outcomes toward the long-term ones, and you decide what short or long or midterm means, right? Sometimes the fact that young women who you believe if they would get some family planning information, some basic family planning information, that would make a difference in their long-term, lifelong trajectory. You can absolutely identify what has to happen for them in the short and the midterm. And even the fact that they showed up on the first day is already changed. The fact that they made a choice to come to the lecture, that's already change that you can measure. And definitely that they came back again, that they returned to keep hearing more. Those are really cool indicators. Okay, the third major challenge is that's called the challenge of attribution. So I don't know if you have this in your world, in the worlds that I've been running in the past couple of decades. I am increasingly expected and required to cooperate with others. And even for funding, right? They say, share your resources, cooperate together. There's a set of theories called collective impact. So if once upon a time in the world, we believe that government was supposed to solve all the social problems, you may know these theories. And then the idea was that government failed. And that's when the third sector and volunteerism and NGOs came in to answer a need that government failed. And now we still have these major social problems. So maybe the NGOs are also not the magic wand. This new set of theories says we need collective impact. It says in order to have sustainable social change, we need to have around the table planning these projects as many different stakeholders as possible. We need to have government, we need to have the people themselves, we need to have NGO leaders, we need to have business people around the table. And then what happens when at the end of the day, we have success, right? We have achieved our goal. And then we want to say it's because of us. We want to attribute the success and the achievement to ourselves. But by definition, we partnered with other people. So we have a problem here of attribution because of the world in which we're working. How do we answer this challenge of attribution? Again, we keep on trying to be able to attribute to ourselves. And here it's also nice because it rhymes in English. We look for places of specific contribution. So if I know that my organization is the only organization in town that has the ear of a particular community, that knows how to communicate with a particular community or a particular population, and all the other people sitting around the table bring something else to the table, but I am the only one that brings that to the table, I can say that is my specific contribution to solving this problem. And we should seek out those kinds of places. I'm going to add two other tips for you. One is, and this is a whole, again, like world, a week we could talk about just adaptive capacity. So adaptive capacity is in the social change activist world, something to look at in places where we as individuals and as organizations and as initiatives don't always know if we're going in the right direction and don't always know that our theory of change is best. One thing that we are increasingly encouraged to do and to look at is our own adaptability, our ability to suddenly Corona came, suddenly COVID came, and how did we sort of pivot and make it possible for us to continue doing our work, even in the face of these, shocking changes. So adaptive capacity is another set of indicators to look at. And the last relates to the collective impact that I said before, is looking at our partnerships and our coalitions and the extent to which they're the right ones. We have enough of them. We are sitting where we need to sit. Questions?
We quickly have one from Val, and is asking, we're talking only focusing on M&E. I would like to raise the concerns on accountability in project management. How do the monitoring and accountability data drive decision-making, program improvement, and learning?
Okay. So again, this is like a whole other topic, but for sure, they're completely related. When I'm talking about M&E, I'm talking about holding ourselves accountable, holding others accountable, and them holding us accountable. That's exactly what we're talking about. And that's why I said at the beginning, and I'll say again at the end, the best LM&E is the kind that forces us and that we are committed to using the data to hold ourselves accountable and to make adjustments along the way. So if I understood the question, the answer is they're not two separate things. That's exactly what I'm talking about. But is that what you wanted? I mean, is that an answer? Okay, great.
We've got a thumb up, so you're all right.
Okay, great. I have to tell you something funny since you are coming to hear about our Israeli experience. The word accountability did not exist in Israel until about, I think probably 10, 15 years ago. The word that existed in Hebrew was responsibility, and a whole other lecture we could have would talk about what's the difference between responsibility and accountability. And that's a really nice activity that I've done with my teams and I could just suggest it to you at your next meeting, at your next, team meeting, just open the meeting by saying, hey, you guys, what do you think the difference is between responsibility and accountability in your language? And I promise you that really cool stuff will surface, and it will kind of be an inspiration for them to say, we want to be both responsible and accountable. So thank you for really good questions so far. I don't know if I said it at the beginning, but this session is supposed to be for you. I can sit alone home and talk to myself all day long. This is really supposed to be for you. So please keep bringing up, and I don't promise that I always have the answers, but take this where you want to go. All right. Good. Nuri, I'm going to continue, or was there another question?
You can go on just now.
Okay, so now is when you're going to really start writing. Yuda, can you go down one slide? Uh-oh, there you go. Okay, so you know what? Go down another slide, and then I'm going to ask you to go back. Okay, so let's look at this. So you see that's me juggling right there. We're going to practice right now. So I would recommend that you all think for a second about a particular project that you are working on already, or that you hope to work on, or that brought you to this series of lectures. Presumably there's something. And keep that in the back of your mind right now. And on your piece of paper, make a little picture like this, okay? And if you want to do it linear or up and down, whatever works for you, but it should have all of these different elements on it. And as you go, as I'm describing the different concepts, write down what you think work for you. And as we go, I'm going to use one example that I brought that for us to practice with, so that we're all talking about one same thing. So first, I'm just going to remind you again about the concepts. The wide social impact, that is like your mission, right? It's like the world will be a better place when. That is like the big thing that you're talking about. And you should know what that is. I'm not talking to you today about that kind of evaluation, but you should know in general what it is. So the example that I'm gonna bring to you, the wide social impact is, you know what, if you go down one more slide, I think we're gonna see it, Yuga. No, go down one more. No, you went up. I want you to go down. Down, down. There you go. Okay, so if you just look here at this example. So for example, wide social impact might be, I want to see stronger social cohesion in my town, in my country, in my city, whatever it is, or maybe increased tolerance between different diverse groups. Okay, that's like a really wide, huge thing. And you actually have to know that that is the world will be a better place when this happens. Okay, and you have a project that you think is gonna, then now I'm on the roadmap, right? So that's the ultimate end of the marathon. But your particular program is going to contribute to that. It's very rare that a program of the kind that we're usually talking to in these groups is actually directly going to be able to take credit for that. there's usually a goal, a specific measurable goal that will show us that we're in that right direction. So in the case of the project that I'm going to talk about with you, and my theory of change says that when we have increased volunteer engagement in our community, that is something that creates a sense of social cohesion. People get to know each other, both the people who are working together and the ones who are maybe providing or receiving services, and it increases tolerance between diverse groups. Okay, so that's an example of wide social impact and how a goal kind of dances with it. I'm going to remind you that the outcomes in this model that I'm presenting to you are the benchmark outcomes toward that specific goal. So I'll give you an example. Does anybody want to yell out an example of what could be a measurable benchmark goal on the way to the benchmark outcome on the way to the ultimate goal? Okay, I'm just going to name it then. Oh, no, I thought I saw somebody open their microphone. I was cautiously optimistic that somebody would yell out. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. So on the level of individuals, in order for there to be a measurable increase in volunteer engagement in our town, we have to have more volunteers. We actually have to have more volunteers. That's a midterm outcome. Today we have 50 volunteers and we need to see 150 volunteers. That's on the program level. On the individual level, we need for those volunteers to have increased capacity to provide a particular service, to work together, to cooperate, to network, right? All kinds of things that they need to be able to do. And maybe we need to see some policy change. Maybe we need to see that local governments are giving in-kind resources for the volunteers to do their work with. Like maybe they provide a room for the meetings, or maybe they provide school books for the volunteers to use when they're training, when they're doing tutoring with the kids, something like that. Those would be the outcomes. The core activity in this particular project that I'm talking about is volunteers giving one-on-one tutoring with kids, volunteers running a soup kitchen or a food bank, could be something like that. And the output would be the number of food packages, the number of kids who participated, the number of hours. And I'll just finish telling you the rest of the concepts. Support activities are everything that we do behind the scenes that make sure that the core activities are run well. So we include in there things like recruiting participants, recruiting volunteers, training them, staff meetings, developing curriculum. That's just in one example that I'm giving you. You might want to at some point evaluate the support activities, but for today, I want to think about really thinking about how the change is happening. And for that end, we don't care that much about the support activities. They're just the noise that sort of keep us busy 95% of the time, but we just do it so that the core activities are effective. Underlying this whole model of our road plan that we're building are some working assumptions. So I can tell you that in the last 2 years, a working assumption of almost all the projects I worked with was that there were going to be new elections within the next 3 to 6 months. And our projects had to take that into account. Your kinds of working assumptions might have to do with the weather, it might have to do with seasons, it might have to do with immigration trends. I don't know what some of your working assumptions are, but these are the things that are going to determine how the project is going to run, and we need to take them into consideration in planning. The target audience, you need to define really well who your target audience is. The target audience is not all of our stakeholders. The target audience is who we expect to see changed if our intervention worked. So there might be lots of partners and stakeholders involved, but the target audience is like if I gave you a little some dolls and I gave you like a little truck and I said the truck is the intervention. Take the little doll. Here's how the doll looks before they go in the truck, and here's how the doll looks after the intervention. Those are the target audiences. And obviously on your plan somewhere on your roadmap, you need to take into consideration your resources. Your resources are going to determine how long your roadmap is. By the way, another support activity is learning, measurement, and evaluation. That should be on your roadmap somewhere. Okay, so let's go back up now to the empty slide. Nuria, tell me if there's any questions, okay?
Very quickly, from Suchita, she wanted to know, while creating partnerships, each partner might have different goals or different reasons to participate. So how can we collaborate on a common goal?
Oh my God, such a good question. Okay, so wait, no, go back up. You go up to practice 1 out of 4.
Next one. That's you.
Okay. So such a timely question. The first thing you have to do is define your project goal. And you have to do that with your partners, because otherwise you're all going to bang your heads against the wall and each other when you get to the end and you didn't mean the same thing. So again, keep in mind that overall social change, but for purposes of everyday work, the goal is really what matters here. And what I've given you here is a set of ways to think about how to define that goal so that you will be able to measure and evaluate and hold yourselves and others accountable. I'm using that accountability thing. When I see that chat, it's distracting. So Nulia, you're going to look at it for me. So again, lots of people, also lots of lecturers are going to come in and tell you how to define a goal. I'm telling you how to define a goal in a way that you will be able afterwards to learn about it and measure it and monitor it and evaluate it, and then use the data to hold yourselves accountable. And in order to do so, you know what, before we start, everybody write down for yourselves. We're not going to be able to share it with each other, but write down for yourselves what you think the goal of the project that you are working on or the organization is. What do you think? And write down, presumably it might start with a 2, T-O, and write down what you think your goal is.
Feel free to use the chat if anybody wants to share with us.
Yeah, if you want to put some examples in the chat, that's fine too. Okay, so as you're writing down, what I'm going to invite you to do, and again, we're not in the same room, unfortunately, so we won't be able to do this, but you should now ask yourself the question, is my goal well-defined? And then obviously you're going to go to your partners and you're going to see if they agree with what you wrote. Does it describe the ideal future within a reasonable amount of time from the beginning and the end of the intervention? In the kind of projects that we're talking about, there's no way that we're going to achieve the impact. So don't say to eliminate hunger or malaria. That can't be the goal of this project. You can say to advance systems in my community that will contribute to the lowering of incidences of malaria or hunger. Is that clear, that difference? To say, in a second, you'll see some other examples. So it describes the ideal future, but within 1 to 3 years. Very often in our kinds of projects, the goal will start with the word, often I suggest that people start with a noun and not with a verb. So where we get confused, like often if you started with a verb, you might realize that you described what you do in order to make the change happen. But if you start with the noun, it forces you to say, what's the change? So it could be like, children in the community will, women in the community will, families in the community will, policies in my country will. Okay, so that's one tip. And then it has to be within, usually these projects, we don't even know if we're going to be around in more than 1 to 3 years. We don't even know if we're going to have the resources. So it should be something that you can see between 1 and 3 years. And I'm giving you a little tip here. Adopt the language of improve, increase, widen, right? Because you're not going to solve the whole problem. Great. I like that. Thumbs up, Al. Thank you. describes the ideal future for which the project can take credit. So again, there is the challenge that we talked about before of attribution and contribution, but to say the children will, to say a goal like children in the community will grow, or will get bigger, or will mature. They're going to mature anyway, right? That's not because of us, because children get bigger, children grow, children mature. And so you want to be very, very specific about what your change is going to look like. In a second, you'll see some examples. Nuria, tell me if there's any questions about any of this in the meantime.
We do have a couple of other things.
Okay, so here, you know what? Let me get to the end of this, and then we'll.
Okay.
Supports the. I'm sorry, I just asked you, and then I decided I wanted to keep going. Supports the overall vision of the organization within which the project is run. So if you're not running it from within an organization, but you do have some partners, it's the same idea. In other words, make sure that as many stakeholders as possible agree. And then let's look at some examples, and then we'll take some questions. A well-defined project goal describes the expected outcomes, right? We talked about the difference before, not the activities or the outputs. So here's an example. The project goal is to distribute 1,000 emergency food packages. That's not a well-defined project goal. That is super important. And it might be an important thing for you to learn about and ask questions about, monitor, but it's not the goal. The goal is to reduce hunger in a specific neighborhood. Why? And maybe you'd even go more specific and say among people ages 70 and above. That is something very specific that you can measure, and it's important, right? Presumably it's important to you. The well-defined project goals should be concrete and achievable. So we have a bad example. As a result of the project, all the students will have better lives. Not reasonable, not realistic, not measurable. As a result of the project, graduates will pass university entrance exams. That is a very specific goal. And the kinds of outcomes that may lead to that might be individual capacity building and growth of the project graduate themselves. You might want to see changes on policy levels. You might want to see that kids are getting better books, more updated books, better teachers, more hours in the classroom. So that goal is something that you can already start to imagine. How are we going to measure it on your roadmap? Okay, let's take some questions.
Okay, so we've got a couple of things. One of them is, which could be a good indicator to establish priorities for projects? Social impact or?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, and here we get a little bit into our salad of terminology, I'm actually saving the word indicator for a little later on. So for me, an indicator is, how do I know that I achieved a specific outcome? That's the indicator. How do I know that a particular event happened? And that would be the output indicator. So Nuria, tell me again the question. What are some indicators of?
Which could be a good indicator to establish priorities for projects?
So I think in our salad of terminology, I would not use the word indicator there. I would use the word criteria. And I would say, what are the criteria that would help us? What's the end of the sentence? Here, wait, I'll look in the chat, see if I can see it.
To establish priorities for projects, yeah.
So I would say, what could be good criteria to establish priorities for projects? And that's an excellent question. And the answer lies in your roadmap. So which is all we're going to get to today. And another day, hopefully, someone will help you think about indicators. If you have established very clearly what your goal is for your project, what the activities are that you believe are going to matter, and what benchmark outcomes you're going to see along the way, then that's going to help you define your criteria. So for example, if your goal has to do with children, you might look at the state of children in your community and you might say, boys with brown hair are doing okay. Girls with brown hair are not doing okay. And as a result of that analysis that we did at the beginning, before we even started the project, we have already identified that girls with brown hair need us more than boys with brown hair at the moment. And that would be a good criteria to help you prioritize what the project should look like. Okay, whoever asked that question, how to follow up.
Okay, so goals have to be measurable, right?
Yes, yes. And for the model and the approach that I'm bringing you to you today, goals have to be measurable. And you might have some goals that you decide not to measure because it's going to be too hard to do it, or it's going to be too expensive to do it, or you have another goal that is more important to you to measure right now. So you might not actually measure it right now, but it has to be measurable. I can't really think of a goal that's not measurable. And that's why I think if you define the goal using this set of criteria, it will be measurable. Again, you might not actually measure it because unfortunately, we don't have all the resources in the world to measure everything. That's a good question. Measure in quantity and quality, right? So if you're asking me, the answer is yes. Try to find indicators that are both qualitative and quantitative. You don't always have the resources to do all of that, and you're going to have to decide what's your priority. So if you are in a community, in a society where quantitative data is valued more than qualitative data, which many of us do exist in those places, unfortunately, you should definitely have quantitative data that you can show and help. Going back to Albert Einstein, I do believe that not everything that is immediately quantifiable is what really matters to us. So I wouldn't stop there. And I would also seek ways to quantify the qualitative. So I'll give you an example. So it might be qualitative, like you might have a qualitative question like, right, so quantitative answers things numerical, right? And qualitative is more that sort of soft stuff. But you could do a little easy survey among parents, okay, who need help in parenting their teens. And, you know, the quantitative, you could look at how many of them arrived, how many of them came to the trainings, how many of them returned to the trainings. But you want to understand from them what really helped them, which are the lectures and the topics that they found most relevant. And so you could do a qualitative survey where you ask them what were the topics that were most useful to you, either an open question or a closed, you could give them like a laundry list and say, here are the topics we studied, pick the top 3 that were most important to you. And then you're going to have a qualitative story of what they told you. But pretty easily, you could quantify that. And you could say 70% of our respondents reported that the topic of teen relationships were at the head of the list. So yes, I think that the extent to which you can use quantitative and qualitative data, you're going to be in great shape. When you can't, you're just going to have to decide what's your priority. Okay, anything else?
Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay.
Another comment was regarding the volunteers, which is with a few of the participants were wondering how to recruit them and keep them motivated.
Volunteers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have to say, I actually love the topic of volunteerism. I did research on what we traditionally consider at-risk populations and actually having them volunteer. Instead, like in most situations, stronger people are the ones who do the volunteering. And I actually looked at research on people who are considered needy and letting them volunteer with others and how powerful that is. So I love the topic of volunteerism and volunteer retention. It's not actually the topic of this talk, so I want to be careful about going too far into it. I can tell you that some evaluation tools that could help you in answering that question would include surveys or interviews or focus groups with your volunteers or your potential volunteers to understand what motivates them. So the main answer to how to, I'll tell you, the main answer to how to retain volunteers is understanding what motivates them and making sure that you're addressing that motivation. So if the main reason for volunteering is that they're lonely at home and it's a way for them to get out, make sure you partner them with other people so that they're not volunteering alone. And if their main motivation for volunteering is that they want to get into the job market and they think that if they get some experience as a volunteer, that's going to make sure you place them in a volunteer. Anyway, you get the idea what I'm telling you. So one way to use evaluation tools to help you answer this question is ask them. Ask them, what would make you stay? What wouldn't make you stay? And then when you have runs and programs for volunteers, look at who stayed and who didn't stay and ask them, why did they stay and why didn't they stay? That's a really good place to start.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Okay, anything else?
Not for the time being.
Okay, we have 15 more minutes, so I'm giving you all a heads up. I'm not going to leave a few minutes at the end to ask questions because I don't want to waste those minutes. I'm assuming that you're going to ask questions as we go along. So we'll go all the way to the end of the half hour. But take note, we have 15 more minutes. Okay, so let's go down, and Yehuda, let's go down. So let's say you wrote your project goal. I hope you did. Take a minute and try to identify on your own project. I should say something else. Some people's brains work in such a way that they would rather start with the activities and then say what the outcomes are. And some people's brains work that it helps them to think about the change and then what activities are going to help them. So whichever way your brain works, on your piece of paper right now, take some notes and try and jot down. What do you think some of your activities are? If you want to say the support activities that feed into them, and what are some benchmark outcomes? And then if you have any questions about these, or you want to ask if you think you got it right, yell out or put it in the chat. And if not, I'm going to keep going. Yehuda, you can go down another slide. Okay, so this is the example that we did. You can go down another slide. Okay, so this is what we are not going to exhaust today. We're going to assume that you made a roadmap and that your roadmap is solid, logical, strategic, and agreed upon by your partners. Okay, that's your roadmap. I don't care if you call it a roadmap, a work plan with outcomes, a theory of change, or a logic model, but you have it and it is solid. Then what you want to do is create a modest and doable evaluation design. This is what that looks like. It says, what are my evaluation goals? Not what are the goals of the project, but what do I hope to learn? What do I hope to do with what I learned? So are you primarily doing the two sort of most common evaluation goals are to understand if the extent to which and how my project has advanced its desired outputs. And another very common goal is to understand, to analyze, to identify if, how, where, maybe in what ways, to the extent to which my project has advanced its desired outcomes. Those are two very common goals: to learn, to understand, to improve my project. Sometimes goals include things like growing the project. Maybe you did a pilot and now you're envisioning taking it to another village, to another city. And so the goal is to understand the conditions under which it would make sense to expand or replicate. Sometimes projects need to shut down, they need to close. So the goal of the evaluation could be to help us understand, to help us kind of wrap it up, to understand what we really did that was meaningful, and how best to exit. Because it's possible that we have to leave and we don't want the whole thing to just fall apart. So the evaluation can help us think about how to exit. Another evaluation goal that's very common is to provide data to our external partners, our funders. I don't like that goal as a sole goal, because I think that then you're going to do a whole lot of work that you're not actually going to benefit from. But I can't deny the fact that that is a legitimate evaluation goal. Does anybody have, if you can think of any other good evaluation goals, put it in the chat. Absolutely, you can start with a pilot project and then replicate it with improvements. That's exactly the idea. And so you could say, my evaluation goal is to understand the best practices in my project and where it's worked really well and where it's not working really well and where I need to tweak it for the next stage. That's a great evaluation goal. Once you've determined why you are doing this often modest learning exercise that may, by the way, your whole evaluation design might be taking your work plan and having a conversation about it with your team. That might be the whole evaluation. That might be all you do. That is a ton. That's enough. There's like 2,000 questions you could ask about your project, I'm sure. In this modest little learning exercise that you're going to do, and maybe it's wider and maybe it's smaller, you are going to want to ask yourself, given my goals, what are the 1 or 2, maximum 3 questions that I think I can answer in this evaluation? And so, they're like the ones I said before, feeding into the goal of understanding where the project worked well and where it didn't. The most obvious questions are, where did the project advance as I expected it to in terms of the planned activities? Where did I see progress with this target audience or with that target audience? Those are the most obvious questions. But common questions that I also come into contact with are things like, what's the ideal profile of the facilitator or of the volunteer coordinator, right? If you're talking about volunteers, the coordinator has a key job. Should the volunteer coordinator herself be a volunteer? Should she be someone who used to volunteer? Or absolutely not? Should it be a professional? Should the volunteer coordinator be paid? Or not, all these kinds of things. Other questions could be about the model of the project, the sort of methodology of the project. They could be questions about the technical running of it, what I said before about Tuesdays or Thursdays being better days. If anybody wants to add into the chat a suggestion or a question about, or a question that you could see yourselves asking about your project, and you want to see if you're on the right track, feel free to post it in the chat. And then the data sources basically are the data source is who has the answers to the question. So if the question I'm asking is, which of the lectures, right? You're about to enter a series of lectures. Which of the lectures did the participants report was most meaningful? Then the data source is, guess who? If your microphones were open, you would say us. You should ask us which ones were most useful. And chances are that some of the people in this room are going to say that lecture 1 was most meaningful, and some are going to say lecture 2 is most meaningful, and some is 3 and some is 4. And to the extent that you're going to be able to look and say, who said that this one was most meaningful to them? Is it people who are working as professionals, or is it people who are working as volunteers? Is it people who are in the Northern Hemisphere or in the Southern Hemisphere? And there's all kinds of data that you can bring that can help actually the planners of this series do a better job. So often the data source is the participant themselves. Another very common data source that there are those evaluators who will tell you is not legitimate, but I'm telling you it is legitimate, and that is you as staff and you as programmers. whether it's volunteer or paid staff. You all are the organizers. You're trying to get something off the ground. You're trying to do something back at home. That's why you came on this call. You are a data source. We should ask you what you think about what went well at the project. So there are some evaluators and researchers who will tell you that that's not objective. I disagree. I think that you know what's working and what's not working. I agree that the more data sources we have, the better, the more complete a picture we're going to have. Sometimes data sources aren't just people. Sometimes the data sources are, quantitative data that we collected. Other data sources that are meaningful are sometimes literature or media coverage of our work. Those are also good data sources. Questions?
I think we've got in data collection analysis tools.
Yeah, so here I'm going to say something about that table.
Okay.
Is there a specific question or should I just, here, in data collection analysis tool, it's about how I use the tools for the goals okay. I'll explain the second table. So the second table is the second part of your evaluation design. And what you're going to do is you're going to pick, really for the first time, 1 or 2 outputs and 1 or 2 outcomes. So I'll give you an example in the volunteer thing. So you're going to say, over the next 6 months, I want to check the number of volunteers and their profile who come to my training sessions at least 80% of the time. Okay, that's an output. It's the measurable deliverable of your activity. Your activity is a volunteer training, and you're going to look at how many people came at least 80% of the time, because this is like a subgroup that's interesting to you. And then you're going to try and sort of identify them. What's the indicator going to be of that output? The indicator is going to be the actual number. And you're going to pick what quality or what characteristic you want to look at. You might want to look at age. You might want to look at where they live. You might want to look at gender. Okay, you'll decide what's important to you to look at. And then you're going to set some targets. Now, targets you should set before you even start working. You don't have to show them to anyone. If you're doing this for yourself, you don't have to tell the funder if you met your targets or you didn't. So don't be afraid. Put a target that you really want to reach. You really want to see that out of 30 volunteers that you recruited at the beginning of the year, you really want to see, and you think it's realistic, that 25 of them will come at least 80% of the time. That's your target. The data collection analysis tool in this case is probably going to be an attendance sheet, right? And the analysis is going to be taking out the attendance sheet. I don't know if you're going to do it by hand or if you're going to use Excel or however you're going to do it, but you're going to collect in there and look at who, if you reach 80%, if you reach 25, who are those 25? And then the other learning that you could do that would be super interesting would be to look at who are in the 20%, who stopped coming, and what can you understand about them. And in terms of accountability and in terms of improving your work, you're going to want to say, oh, maybe I'll just work with those 80% back profile people, or maybe the people I care about the most are the 20%. I need to do something different. Something didn't work with them. And you might do you might use a data collection tool like a focus group or interviews and ask people, why did you stop coming or why did you continue coming? What I'm going to do in the last 4 minutes is run through the rest of the slides just to tell you what else is here, and we'll send it to you. And I'll just say before you move the next slide, the little practice that we just did on the output, you would do the same thing with an outcome. So if you wanted to pick in terms of your volunteers, improved capacity of the volunteer. Let's say it's a volunteer working with the elderly. And they don't know how to work with the elderly, or they don't have the patience, they didn't think that they would have the patience to work with the elderly. One of the outcomes that you might want to check is increased knowledge or tools with which to work with the elderly. And then you do the same thing. You pick an indicator, a target, and a data collection tool. Okay, Yuda, let's run through and I'll just tell you all what is still here. So Dr. Jess Dart is a phenomenal evaluator from Australia. And I just gave you a quote here, and there's I think she has like a website. She also has on there I think it's like a 3-hour fantastic lecture on this kind of stuff. And I recommend you go and hear it. And she has it on there for free. You can keep going, Yuda. I think this is more sort of background that you can just read through afterwards. You can keep going. This is a logic model. So you can have this. You can take this on. I see that it's kind of small. People are looking closely. When you get it, you can blow it up. And you can actually plug in. And when you use it on a PowerPoint, you can move the little boxes around. So it's actually super friendly. So we gave you that. Enjoy it. Keep on going, Yuda. Uh-oh. I see a blank screen. Oh, okay. There you go. This is just more background. You can keep on going. Keep on going, keep on going. These are things that if we had another more and more hours, I'm seeing some people smile at this. Many of you know about the SMART indicator thing. So it's sort of a known thing, but it's a oldie but a goodie. Keep on going. This is a slide that shows you the 7 core criteria, but for some reason, there are not 7 on here. There are 5 on here. So Yuda, before you send this out, change it to say 5. Wait, go back up. And you will see on here though, that it's using it, that it's feasible, that it's grounded in the strategy that we talked about. This is a nice way to sort of wrap up what we talked about today. That it's accurate and that you engage others in it, right? So that the more it's participatory, the more authentic it's going to be. You can keep going. This is a little, this picture is a picture that you can use in your next staff meeting or your next team meeting. And you can show it on the screen or, make little cards and hand them out to people and ask them, if we want to really be accountable, what are the tools that we need to be able to do this? What do we have in our team right now? What are we missing in our team? And what do we need to do to fill up this toolbox? And the last slide, and I think I'm ending just on time, is to say thank you all. I really wish we could do this in person and that I could hear you too and learn from you too, because I'm sure I would. I'm wishing you all the best of luck and keep staying safe and healthy and take care of each other and yourselves.
Jennifer, thank you so very much for this presentation. And thank you very much to all our participants for the very interesting questions. If you wish to receive Dr. Jennifer Cohen's presentation, please write in the chat your email address. The chat is going to be safe, and then Yehuda and I can forward you this presentation. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you so much for your time.
Take good care, everybody.
And to the rest of you, the same as Jennifer, we wish you all the very best. And we hope to see you next week on the 18th on our next session, which is addressing gender biases and the promotion of equal participation. So I really hope to see you all there. And I'll pass it on to my colleague, Yuda.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was a great presentation. Thank you for all our participants as well for being with us to the end. As Nuria said, we have another session coming up, so please remember, put it in your calendar, and we are hoping that you will be with us next time. Once again, thank you so much for Dr. Cohen for a great presentation, and thank you. Shalom.
Take care.